Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our Future Ready Higher Education Summer Webinar Series. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We're excited to have so many higher education leaders, administrators, and technology professionals with us today. My name is Nancy Cooper, and I am CEO here at Servio Consulting. For those of you who may not be familiar with Servio, we are a women-owned IT consulting firm focused on all things Salesforce for education and the public sector industries. We are also an education cloud design partner, which means we work closely with the Salesforce product development team in really helping shape the future of education cloud through our implementation and industry experience, as well as feedback from customers like you all. We're especially excited to partner with Salesforce on this webinar series because we share a common belief. Higher education is at a pivotal moment. Institutions today are being asked to do more than ever before. They're navigating enrollment pressures, workforce demands, evolving student expectations, data challenges, and now the rapid growth of AI. At the same time, they must continue delivering exceptional experiences while operating more efficiently and effectively. And that's really why we chose the theme of Future Ready Higher Education. Through this series, we'll explore how institutions can leverage technology, data, AI, and strategic partnerships to better serve their students, faculty, staff, alumni, and their broader communities. Today's session is focused on what we call the power of the platform. One of the things we see most often when working with institutions is that many institutions are only scratching the surface of what's really possible with Education Cloud. Education Cloud is far more than a CRM. It provides a connected platform that can support the entire learner lifecycle from recruiting and admissions through alumni engagement, advancement, and beyond. The real power of the platform comes from its ability to bring together people, processes, data, and insights into a single connected ecosystem that enables institutions to make better decisions, improve outcomes, and create a more meaningful experience. There's no one better to help us explore that vision than today's guest speakers. So it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Sadarth, Vice President of Higher Education for Community and Technical Colleges at Salesforce. Eric, thank you for joining us today, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Nancy. And for those who I haven't met, so I'm Eric. I'm the VP of Higher Ed at Salesforce that covers our community colleges and technical schools. So we're a national team. One of the cool things about our team is we're talking to schools across the country. So we have different AEs on our team that are covering territories. So I have 8 AEs basically that are covering schools across the country. And we wanted to bring this webinar series to be applicable not just to community colleges and technical schools, but also to four-year institutions, public, private, for-profit, nonprofit. So what we're going to be doing throughout this is bringing you topics that we're hearing from the market that we think are going to be very applicable. And our idea is to bring best practices and have a good conversation that drives hopefully best practice and idea sharing. And just like Servio, Salesforce wants to be here to help you solve big problems at your institution. And so with me from Salesforce today are Dale and Courtney, and I'll let them introduce themselves a bit later. But our intent with this session is to really talk to you about how the power of the platform and the power of the platform, especially at Salesforce, can really help you solve problems across the continuum within your institution, whether that's in recruiting, admissions, student success, workforce development. We hear about challenges that institutions are trying to solve across the spectrum here. And so we want to bring you some thoughts. We have a really nice Q&A at the end that will hopefully also spur some ideas. So thanks again for attending today. And I'm going to quickly pass it to Dale, who's going to go through a little bit of an overview of Salesforce in the education space. But thanks again for being here.
Thanks so much, Eric, and really great to see all of you here today. These are always really fun conversations for me and now Courtney and all of us on this call. So let me give you a brief background on myself. I spent over 30 years in higher education before coming to Salesforce. I've been here about 5 years. And what I like to do when I describe myself is describe myself as a translator. I translate all the fun things that you guys are dealing with in higher education to our teams internally, who are really focused on supporting and partnering with all of you. And so I try to help them understand, what are the big issues? What are the big trends? How can they best serve you? And then I also work with folks like you to help you understand the power and the value of Salesforce in supporting your mission to be able to do the things that you believe are why you're working at the institutions where you work. So that's an exciting part of what I do and why I love what I do, because I believe in the mission of higher education and all of the things that all of you guys are trying to accomplish. So on the next slide, what I thought I would do is describe a little bit about what I'm seeing across the education space, but also why Salesforce for me and for all of us on this call is really so valuable. So a couple of themes. I love the framing of this call, which is future ready. All of you are coming at this from a different place and with different missions, with different challenges, with different opportunities. So thinking about the future is really important. Thinking about where you want to be, where you could go, I think is always one of the most important things to do. Because if you don't even know where you might go, it's hard to envision how to get there. And so that's one of the things that I love about the framing of this. The second is that the challenges are real. There's so much happening in higher ed. All of you are feeling it in different ways. And it's a really challenging time to be in higher ed. So one of the things that I valued at the University of Maryland, where I spent the last 30 years about Salesforce, were a couple of things. One, its flexibility. We are in a time that is incredibly transformative, pressure-packed, changing all the time. We in higher ed need a platform that is flexible and able to adapt to the changes that are occurring almost on a daily basis, and that will continue into the future. I think the other thing that is important is that we need a robust platform, one that can do things across the student life cycle, across our constituents, and because there are not endless IT resources, there are not endless resources that you have at your disposal. Creating a strategic platform that we can build on together is something that I think is really valuable. So this is really describing our vision for how we can support higher education. At the bottom, thinking about all of the data sources, the systems, the things that you're trying to do on your campuses, bringing that together onto a platform specifically built for education in Agentforce Education for all of your different constituents, whether they're learners, faculty and staff, corporate partners, government partners. And then what can we do? Nancy talked about the student focus, but there's also the whole institutional operations and things that we can do in research and innovation, the faculty and staff experience, operations, however you think about that, and then marketing and communications. So from first prospect all the way to graduation and beyond, and then all of the other ways that we can do that. So that's what we're going to talk about, the power of the platform, and excited to not only talk about it abstractly, but talk about how other institutions have thought about this as well.
All righty. Thank you, Dale. So before we get to the Q&A and before we talk more about, how we get this done in practice, let's talk a little bit about data and AI readiness for the future. So I'm Jake Melanie, I'm the Solutions Director here at Servio Consulting. I see a lot of familiar faces that have worked with myself or my team, but for a little bit of background, I run our pre and post-sales solution design and architecture. So what that means is I'm working with you all on the pre-sales side to identify the requirements, identify what you're looking for that system to do. What are those outcomes, right? And outcomes will be a common theme here amongst the next 6 or 7 slides. And then translate those outcomes into the Salesforce ecosystem. There's a lot that can work or that exists within that Salesforce ecosystem. And then we translate that over into the post-sales side, which is discovery, requirements gathering, understanding how do we take those outcomes and requirements and put them in place, right? Get that functionality inside of the system where you all are ultimately realizing those outcomes. So let's go ahead and get into the conversation here. So my talk track and what we're going to be covering over the next 10 or so minutes is really AI readiness, right? And what does that mean? What does AI readiness look like? What components do I need to be thinking about? And the point of these slides and this conversation is not in any way to scare you. It's not to say, hey, we're not ready. It's to make sure that you're thinking about the problem area the right way, right? You're thinking about how do we solve for these challenges that we have as an institution? How do we make sure that we're going into that conversation prepared to understand what pieces do I need to plug in so that I get that outcome that we're really looking for? So first, AI doesn't create intelligence, it amplifies your data, right? You can have the best ideas, right? You can have all of the cool bells and whistles that you want with these AI components, Agentforce or otherwise, but without good data to back it up, you lead to a scenario where the back end isn't ready for it, right? And you lead to that second bullet, that messy data, where you have fast, confident, but scaled mistakes, right? Where everything appears to be going down the right track. The AI tools appear to be doing what you want them to do, but until you feed in good, clean, solid data, you're going to end up in scenarios where that maybe the AI agent is not giving you the result you want, or it's looking at the wrong data set, or it's not giving you a complete picture, right? Because the data wasn't ready for it, or the outcome wasn't clearly defined. For you all and everybody on this call, the concept of that single student record functionally makes a lot of sense, right? It's really clear, right? Well, student record, right? This is the student. We know who that person is, but as you look across your ecosystem, and we have these conversations every day as consulting partners, we recognize that the SIS, the CRM, the LMS, the financial aid system, they all look at students a little bit differently, right? And so one of the challenges that we have is to understand what exists, what doesn't exist, and how do we combine those records to be a single source. In my role, I have a lot of discovery conversations, and this isn't even necessarily about AI specifically, but we have a lot of discovery conversations where we say, hey, I want to create these early alerts. I want to create this outcome where if a student is falling behind, then I can get that in front of an advisor as an example. Those are data-driven decisions, right? And we'll go into the discovery, we'll have a conversation, we'll say, okay, great. You want to understand the letter grade dropped, or you want to understand that the attendance isn't there, or you want to understand that they haven't filled out their FAFSA for next year yet, right? Do we know where those data points live? Well, it should be in the student information system. Okay, great. Let's take a look at that, right? Who owns that data point in that SIS? Well, I'm not really sure, right? How often does that data get updated? Well, I think it's once a month, or I think it's biweekly, or I think it's nightly, right? So as we look at how do we prepare for an AI project, preparing for an AI project is really preparing for a data project and understanding what you have at your disposal, understanding who owns those components, how we access that data, and how we bring it all together so that you're best prepared to implement an agent to solve for those outcomes that you define. Clean data, right? We hear that term a lot. Is your data clean? Is it ready? We talk about it for integration. We talk about it for migration. We talk about it for agentic work. But what does it mean to be clean? Clean isn't just one thing, it's 6 things, right? So that data needs to be accurate, needs to be complete, consistent, current, unique, and accessible. If you can check the box on all 6 of these things, and you have really clean data. And as everybody on this call can probably acknowledge, data is messy. Data is always messy. Hopefully in the future it won't be, but today it still very much is, right? So being ready for an AI project doesn't necessarily mean that each one of these 6 boxes are checked, but what we can, or what we should know, is whether or not it is checked, right? If you're unsure if it's accurate, if you're unsure if it's current or accessible or unique, okay, let's go answer that question. Then let's get into the project, right? Because we can work around data that maybe isn't as up to date, right? Maybe we know, for example, going back to the other slide around early alerts, maybe we know that the grade data is actually has a 1-week delay. Okay, we can work with that, right? We can work around that, but we can't work around it unless we know that it's a 1-week delay, right? So understanding how your data lands across these 6 points will give that picture to be able to make informed decisions on what outcomes that agentic work is really trying to solve. To identify what are those outcomes, what we really need to do is start with the goal, right? And I hear a lot in my role, kind of that left side of the slide, I want AI to write my emails. Or even more broadly, I need AI, right? Because maybe the provost, maybe the one of the deans of the school, somebody is saying, hey, we need to use AI, because every single person on this call is hearing about AI in every aspect of their life, not just professionally. And so there's a lot of direction to go use it, right? There's a lot of direction to say, hey, we're going to fall behind if we're not using AI in our day-to-day lives inside of work. But using AI is not, it's not really a strategy. It's not an outcome, right? It's a general direction. And so the strategy can't be, hey, I want to use AI to write my emails. The strategy should be, I want to use AI to write my emails so we can get in front of more students, so we can reduce the summer melt in, really frankly, this time of year, right? Prior to that matriculation or that student actually getting on campus. And so to get there, right, how do I understand what my actual outcome is? Well, let's work backwards, right? Let's say, okay, what is that outcome? What decisions do we need to make to get to that outcome? And ultimately, what data needs to drive it? Going back to the early alerts example, I know I want to use AI to drive my early alerts so that I can get in front of students more proactively when they are struggling in class, right? Okay, great. The decisions are what are my identifiers, right? Maybe it's, like I mentioned earlier, maybe it's the grade, right? Maybe they've had an A for 13 of the 16 weeks in a semester, but now that A dropped down to a C seemingly overnight. Maybe that decision point is attendance. Maybe they're not coming to class as often, right? Maybe they're having issues outside of the classroom that we're identifying, right? Great, now you've identified decisions. Now let's go figure out what that data looks like, right? And so attendance being a big data point with a lot of data associated, what do we know about that data, right? And so working that outcome backwards is going to allow us to identify what is our North Star, right? What are we trying to solve? What's the outcome? What do we need to solve to get to that point? And how do we solve it with the data behind the scenes? Kind of switching gears a little bit from the outcomes to, okay, how do we actually put this in place? How do we put this in practice? As we are working through our day-to-day lives, right, there's, like I said, AI everywhere. How do we get to a position where, as an institution, we're ready for those AI tools, not from a data perspective, but from a people perspective? And so governance of AI is going to be really important for us. And governance isn't just about putting in red tape, right? It's giving the ability for us to move forward safely, right? Where that governance exists, now our teams can move forward with understanding what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, who owns what, right? So one of the things that comes up all the time outside of AI, again, the definition of terms, right? And so what do we mean by enrolled? It's amazing how many conversations we go to with higher ed institutions, and there are arguments, even as the consultant sitting across the table from them, right? Okay, what is an enrolled student? Theoretically, that's an easy question. In practice, not so easy, right? Because you get into non-credit work, you get into online work, you get into returning students. What does it mean to be enrolled, right? The same kind of questions should be asked about AI. What does it mean to be using AI as an institution? Are we talking about agentic work with Agentforce? Are we talking about more of the consumer type products that we use probably in our personal lives all the time, like a Claude or a ChatGPT, right? What does the governance look like around those things so that our teams are prepared to continue working and continue scaling towards the future? And then finally, to wrap up my section here, 5 questions that we should be asking before that first AI project starts, right? And these are really readiness questions, right? Can you answer a basic question about a student from one source of truth, right? Do we know what that data looks like? It's really what that question's getting at. Do duplicate or conflicting records exist? And do you know how many, right? This is kind of that same point on, you don't have to check the box on all 6 of those items from a few slides ago. You need to know whether or not you can check the box, right? Do your teams define key terms the same way? What does enrolled mean, right? And so if we want an Agentforce agent, for example, to look at applications in the admissions lifecycle, we can absolutely do that. But what do we mean when we say validate that this applicant is a good fit for the institution? Are we speaking the same language when we talk about that, right? Because maybe credit and non-credit, they validate students differently. Are we speaking the same language as we go to define it? Or are we going to go live with an agent that only works for half the institution? Do you know what data you're allowed to use and how, right? Obviously, data security is a very important point when we look at any AI project. Have we already defined what's fair game for an agent to use and what we shouldn't plug in and we shouldn't allow for agents to access to make decisions for us? And do you have a specific outcome in mind? Or just you want to try a new tool, right? If you just want to try a new tool, it's okay to play around in a sandbox with that. But if we want to make enterprise change, right, and we want to make institutional change for new outcomes, then we really need to define that outcome and be prepared with the data to get there. And so on this track, again, the slides that I've covered here, none of it is for the purpose of scaring anyone into thinking, hey, we're not ready for this. It's so that we can have those light bulb moments before it's too late, before we are at UAT and realize, oh, we don't actually have the data to support this thing that we built, right? And so with that, one of the outcomes for Servio coming out of this webinar is that all of our attendees were offering a free hour session for a data readiness and strategy so that we can come together and we could talk about, what do you have, what do you not have? What are the outcomes that you think you're looking to accomplish? And let's kind of build out a roadmap for you to understand your data readiness and your AI readiness. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Dale and Courtney, and we're going to kick off the Q&A part of today's webinar. Dale, we cannot hear you. You're on mute.
Thank you, Jake. You already heard who I am, so we won't do that again, but I want to introduce Courtney and let her tell you about herself. And then we have a little Q&A that we're going to do together to share the University of Texas at Dallas story, and then a few other insights as well. So Courtney.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dale. And we should note that we're a Slack company. So Dale's transitioning from Slack to Teams, and Teams is not always the best for guests. So thank you all for your grace as we co-host this with Servio. We're so grateful to them for having us. But I started my career at UT Dallas almost 17 years ago in the office of the provost. I was in that role for a couple of years and transitioned to the Office of Undergraduate Education and Academic Affairs. And during that time, the institution was experiencing really unprecedented growth. We more than doubled in size, and that's a pretty important characteristic of our story, because it meant that I had the privilege of really building out a pretty significant student success infrastructure of programmatic support for directly with students, but also creating a student success data analytics team so that we could be responsive to the changing demographic needs of our institution, and really also working closely with faculty as those demographic shifts were happening and growth was happening on everything from curricular redesign to undergraduate research initiatives and academic advising evolution as well. But I don't know about your institutions, those of you on the call, but at UT Dallas, we always joke that it took 10 years to get traction on a new project. And I actually found out about Salesforce about 8 years ago. And before we launched our enterprise-wide Ed Cloud implementation for the full student lifecycle. So we always joked at the university that we were ahead of schedule. We did it in 8 years. We got sufficient buy-in in 8 years instead of 10. And that was really important for us. While we joke about how long it takes to get buy-in on these larger digital transformation projects, it's important to be future thinking now. Dale and I've had a lot of conversations recently about, if not now, when, for universities, given the financial landscape and demographic cliff landscape, and a lot of the challenges and demands that we're experiencing in higher education. But after serving in undergraduate education, I transitioned to a role as Associate Vice President for Institutional Success and Decision Support that allowed me to be executive sponsor of our Education Cloud implementation. So I'm excited to share a little bit about that experience with you all and some lessons learned, really, if you're considering a large scale project or you're already in a project and want to talk through that or ask specific questions, please don't hesitate. But Dale, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in, because I think learning from you and your experience at UT Dallas is so helpful. So you talked about the kind of explosive growth that you experienced in such a short time. Can you kind of paint the picture for us about what was happening when you were considering adopting Salesforce? What was the student experience like? What was the technology landscape like? Anything else that kind of helps us understand what was going on?
Yeah, there were a few tipping points that I think pushed us over the edge across the university senior leadership areas that were common challenges known at various levels, but that had really hit that threshold of we need to take action. While experiencing that rapid growth at the undergraduate level, and our hardworking team were able to maintain those at the undergraduates, we were a victim of the geopolitical landscape for our master's enrollment, which had pretty significant financial impact on the university. Losing that the international pipelines, those kind of decreasing, we realized that our enrollment operations needed to be strengthened and sophisticated and scaled more so that we could be less vulnerable in the future and more sophisticated in our recruitment and admissions of graduate students. And declining yield. Just because you're experiencing high applications doesn't mean you are able to yield as many students. It's a very competitive market with a lot of universities experiencing challenges that are making them also be more creative in how they get students to the universities. But we also had some internal resource inequities that were very visible in the student experience. Our business school, very well resourced, and those students got all of the bells and whistles and had all the things. They already had a Salesforce instance. And then we had other schools with students who were attriting, impacting our retention and persistence and graduation rates that didn't have that technical infrastructure and resources. And so bringing equity in resource allocation and the student experience to contribute to our own outcomes was very important. Communication and effectiveness. I don't know if any of you still work directly with students, but if you've ever seen a student worker's inbox, it's horrible. You know why they don't go to things, you know why they don't reply to things or take action, because the institution hadn't really evolved to communicate with students effectively. And that was really big and top of mind because we were starting to see more apathy, students having a lot of stressors. And it was important for us to get students to the appropriate resources efficiently and effectively without creating additional burden for our staff, helping them work smarter, not harder. Because in just one meeting with a student, and I was still individually meeting with students, you'd have to be logged into at least 3 different places, have 3 different windows open, to see 3 different pieces of data, sometimes 4 if you wanted to look at documentation like an on-base or something. And you couldn't really efficiently conduct holistic student success support, much less during times when you're also doing transactional work around registration. But our ecosystem, Dale, I'm glad you brought that up. We had an inventory done, and we had over 250 pieces of technology out there that had some form of overlap with what we were looking for in a technical solution. And we were able to sunset about 54 of those, I think, in the end, by the end of this year. They should accomplish that, which is a really significant cost savings for the university and a big change in how we think about procurement of technical solutions and why we want to reduce data fragmentation. That was very important because, as Jake was talking, and I wonder if some of our attendees are thinking this too, you're so excited to get in and make these changes, but you know your limitations. Your data's dirty. You have 5 fields that all mean the same thing that need to be mapped over. You have to come to a consensus on common definitions before you can move forward. We knew we needed to do that. We were very self-aware, and this project prompted and facilitated a lot of that work.
Love it. Travis just asked a question
Yeah,
about the Salesforce support that you had. What was your team, and did you use partners? So love to hear about that
yeah.
as part of your journey.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you go ahead and asking that question, Travis, because we gave ourselves a long runway, a phase 0 in our implementation project timeline. We were able to secure funding over multiple fiscal years to fill internal full-time roles, which is really important. We hired our first ever not situated in information technology project manager to oversee this project. And that person was a complete rock star as an individual, but without that position, our project would not have been successful because they led our internal change management teams, which weren't employees. It was everyone across the institution, these advocates we had appointed across. And on our developer side, we gradually, again, year over year, so it wasn't strenuous financially speaking, hired full-time employees. A lot of universities don't do that. They kind of add it to existing employees. And that was a big change for us. We ended with 5 within a 3-year period, which is, I don't know if it's difficult to get full-time employees at your institution, probably is. If it is, this project helped us do that. And now they're undergoing some reskilling, which is so rare and also very important. As you phase out technologies, bringing those new ones in. But we did have an implementation partner who did. We were very strategic in the technical kind of split of duties, what was taking place there. But what was honestly most important was after that work ended, we did have some technical challenges that Dale has kind of a question queued up about challenges. We experienced really significant technical challenges in the hard coding, in the back end build. And Salesforce was willing, and they already had their money. They didn't have to do this. They were willing to meet with us weekly to sequence, and they gave us, they would record videos for us on how to do things and would come up with no code solutions for some of my team members as well. And that was huge. It really surprised me that a company was willing to do that. And it was nice to see those values in real time.
That it's great insight, Courtney. I think Travis, your question is always top of mind for people. Like, how do we support this? What I experienced and what I see a lot across the country is it's never one answer in terms of how you staff these things. I would say that one of the things that, and this is not because we're on a webinar with Servio, one of the things that I think is very valuable is to have a partner that will help you. Trying to self implement and do all of the things on your own is really hard and not always the best practice, for sure. But because you can learn from them and you can benefit from the value that they bring in a short amount of time. I would also say that you can't do it without a bunch of people that are trained and focused on it. So those are kind of best practices from my perspective on staffing. Yeah, so let's keep moving because we want to cover as much as we can. One of the interesting things, I don't know how this worked for you, Courtney, but for me, like understanding the platform, understanding the power of the platform, it took me a while to figure that out when I was a customer. So how did that work for you? And what do you think maybe you would want customers to understand about what the platform means so that they can short circuit all the time you and I had to figure it out?
Yeah, and really it's one of the major reasons I'm so excited to now be an industry advisor, because I learned this and I lived it, and now I can speak to it so fluently, from challenges to opportunities. And the biggest difference in all of the stakeholders I would speak to during our project was what makes it a platform, a powerful platform. And the Salesforce distinguishing quality is it's not transactional, right? I mentioned the partnership, but it's also not out of the box. Now, some institutions need out of the box due to technical lift constraints or, vision, what they're hoping to solve for. But what makes it different is once you establish that strong foundation, you have infinite possibilities and strategic opportunities, from the short-term wins that could yield very immediate return on investment, literal money, right? Every student successfully enrolled, every student successfully retained and graduated represents tuition revenue or prospective donor that you've cultivated by providing an improved student experience, right? And so that's very, very important. That's the Salesforce difference. And so being able to keep that core tenet of the story, because what we got asked, had some leadership changes, really significant ones, budget and finance, new president, at really important, right, pre-go live. So you can imagine trying to convince people what you've been working on for 2 years, right? And the question would be like, so are we finished? Have we done everything that we said we were going to do? I'm like, oh, like cringe on the inside, but that's not what we're going for here. We had check boxes of core functionality we wanted to implement, but this is digital transformation. And Dale, you and I talked about how cringe that terminology has become now because it's been overused. But for lack of a better term, put better terms in the chat if you'll have ideas, would be really helpful. But for lack of a better one, I said, that's not what this is. This isn't implementing a product and moving on. This is cultural change. This is organizational process change. This is operational efficiency at its core, but we're changing people's day-to-day work lives and the student experience real time. And that's huge. And so communicating that story and bringing it back to the individual level is absolutely the difference.
Yeah.
Makes it a platform versus a product, in my opinion. Now,
Yeah.
very biased opinion. I acknowledge that, but I'm biased
yeah.
for good reason.
Yes. I think, when you live it, you understand it in ways that folks from the outside don't always. And I think it is so powerful. And what I would say is, while it's challenging, it's also one of the most fun parts of my whole career was implementing Salesforce, because of all of the other things that were associated with it. You are really changing the way people do business, the way people experience the university. And that's a really fun and powerful thing to participate in. So, while there are challenges, there's also, for me, there were way more opportunities and fun that were a part of it. So I want to kind of end with this, and then I know you have some lessons learned, Courtney. I want to give time at the end, but I love, for everybody on the call, I'm a real talk guy. I'm not a happy talk guy. I want to know that this is worth doing, but also it can't be perfect. It's never perfect. So tell us about the implementation experience, things that you went through, the challenges you faced, how you overcame them. Because I think everybody learns from those things, because we all know that technology implementations are hard and never perfect.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll try to go quickly, because I do have that kind of summary lessons learned slide that I hope resonates at least a couple of points with all the attendees and people who watch this maybe later too. But I mentioned the leadership challenges. So ensuring that your vision statement, to Jake's point, the challenges you're seeking to solve are agnostic to, the university strategic plan, to people, that no matter what changes, you can directly align it. We had to do that realignment, but because multiple times, but because what we were, the vision what we were working towards stayed the same, it was easy to do that. And that's very, very important. The financial factors were a big challenge too. So being very intentional, because everyone was like, why are we spending all this money? You know, I'm not sure we're going to get merit this year. And it's devastating when you're thinking about that. You say, if we don't do this now, the cost of doing nothing is actually worse. You won't get merit for multiple years if we don't invest in recruiting more students to improve our institution's financial health. And so that storytelling with that data, but being very intentional and tying back, we sunset these systems. It equated to that dollar amount saved. We increased from the point we implemented in recruitment and admissions, we were able to yield this many more students. Having those metrics and that assessment plan, how you're assessing the success of your project, how you're quantifying that is so, so important to address that challenge of buy-in on it. The communication sustainability, you know, Travis asked about staffing. Our PM did leave. I told you she was amazing, but she did leave at a pretty critical point in the project, and making sure you have mechanisms to sustain communication with your stakeholders. You know, that you had other ways to go. We weren't conducting as many meetings, but we were using Teams more creatively, right? We were conducting more lunch and learn type of opportunities for people, office hours for people to drop in and ask questions. And we were willing to pivot our governance structure, which you have to be willing to do at set increments as the project evolves. That really helped us address some of that.
Very cool. Do you want to share the lessons learned? Next slide, folks. Whoever's running.
Yeah, that worked.
There we
That
go.
works for me. And you know, Dale, as we Q&A with the attendees, I would love for you, you know, my experience at UT Dallas is just one institutional data point, but you've been an IA for an industry advisor for a long time now. And so, you know, any reinforcement of trends that you're hearing outside of, you know, in your role, that would be, I think, really helpful. I think there's a few things that resonate maybe with all institutions is that patience and persistence will eventually in a lot of cases get you buy-in. And that's, you know, I joked about our 8 years of advocating and hosting little demos and bringing people, other universities in, introducing leaders while you're at a conference with them to people who are using Salesforce. All of those little pieces of reinforcement about the why, it can yield you, you know, that buy-in later. Having that sustainable project model is critical, and the ability to evolve governance. I think we were able to, like I said, get grace with advisors who it was difficult to make change. There's no downtime for an academic advisor. Yeah, registration's a peak period, but having a sustainable project model that included the constant stakeholder communication and opportunity to interact with them, the people you're impacting, was critical. The intentional project development or the other is another one, and that project model and governance piece of it. I won't go into too much detail on this just to make sure we have at least 10 minutes for Q&A, but the timeline development, that phase 0 was so critical. Having an outside third party come in and support us in developing and refining our core functionalities and project requirements that we wanted was so important. Executive sponsors was so important, not just myself, but other people on cabinet. So if they heard negative feedback, they could immediately counter it because they were in the know at such an intensive level across the organization. That project manager cannot cite that enough. And we don't do a lot of change readiness assessment in higher education, much less intentional sustained change management, but we did that really well at our institution too. And I think that was a huge help. I'll talk a little bit about the project model. We use a lot of Salesforce resources on customizing our governance model. They provide best practices, and if you can customize that to your institution, I mean, chef's kiss, you're going to be successful, because if you are involving all of the key stakeholders on the front end in a clear leadership role within a federated model, while keeping that kind of central kind of center of excellence in mind, you can go really far. The data management and optimized resource allocation was also really important, kind of those metrics and working on changing architecture, right, to have that lasting change at the institution. But just to conclude, that fostering collaboration and communication, stakeholders have to feel like they can come to you with serious concerns. We had issues with our advisor assignments, how they were working. and they felt comfortable enough to not just complain in the background, right, in their meetings or at the Keurig. They would come to us so that we could take action and address issues. And that's really important, creating a safe psychological safety in all those meeting spaces or even outside of them for your end users, because that's what really ensures that you have that buy-in. But prioritizing transparency and the user experience in all things, staying grounded in that about why you're doing what you're doing. All right, Dale, you want to
Love it.
open it up for some Q&A with our
Yes, I'd love it. Hopefully that brought some things to mind that you want to ask about. Anybody on the call, we can all pitch in. So any questions that are top of mind, folks? And you can't be shy because there's not a ton of us. We can you can be curious, and they're great questions, I'm sure, in your brain.
I'll keep an eye on the chat and on hands raised, Dale, but I would love to hear from you on trends you're hearing among other customers that maybe also kind of rose to the top as I was speaking to, that you think are common across a lot of universities, or maybe exciting things that you're hearing. So we end on a positive note. I know Jake will bring us home on that, talking about free support on change and AI readiness, but if you want to share a little bit of trends and maybe some exciting applications that you're hearing too while we wait maybe on additional questions.
And before I do that, any questions that you have?
Let's do it.
I'm okay with a little bit of silence waiting.
Oh yeah, don't forget Dale and I are in higher ed too. We'll sit in the uncomfortable.
All right. Well, I want to focus a little bit on AI and data readiness and all of those things, because that's, I think, what is often top of mind for folks right now. It is certainly what I would say is, for all of you on the call, what I'm seeing is these are future facing, aspirational for many institutions. This journey is going to be long, and it's okay. So don't feel like, oh my gosh, we're so far behind. Everybody is thinking about this, and it is top of mind. What I would say that I'm seeing, and what I love to see, is when institutions say, look, we're not in a perfect spot, and we don't have all of our data in order, but we want to do this. It's important. We see the value. And so what I'm seeing is folks that are jumping in and trying and testing and learning and adapting. And I think that mindset in this stage of where we are is really important for all of us and for all of you. The other thing that I would say, that kind of lessons learned, or things that I'm seeing across our customers, is a focus on really being clear about where you want to start. What I've loved as people have started to implement agents and AI in other ways is that they think about it differently. Some are really out there and they're like, we want to go student facing, constituent facing. Others have said, no, we want to really focus on very low risk, maybe low reward, but we're going to learn from it. And we have good data, and so we're going to learn from it. And we don't have a ton that we have to do in order to make that happen. And so kind of thinking about, where is your risk tolerance? And then just getting in and doing stuff that will help you learn, because this is new for all of us. I will confess, I'm learning every day. I have to learn every day. And that's one of the fun things. I'm kind of, that's a value of mine, is learning. And so I think that's true for all of us that work in higher ed. All right.
Yeah, we got a couple in the chat, Dale. I'm replying to Travis right now. If you want to take the last one that came in, for organizations early in the Salesforce adoption journey, what are some quick wins that you've seen, that helped increase user buy-in and platform adoption? We found that some of the additional security requirements, such as multi-factor authentication, can create initial resistance or discomfort. What strategies have you seen work well to help users embrace both the platform and the security measures that come with it? Oh, I can.
Yeah, really, really good question. I think one of the things that I thought in our implementations that worked really well was involving people as much as possible in that process. So one of the greatest things that I heard when I was at Maryland from our academic advising community was, what we love about Terp Engage was the rebrand of Salesforce for the Terrapins, the Maryland Terrapins. It was a advising tool built by advisors, right? So they had to struggle with a lot of those things. They had to understand them, and they had to make decisions about them. And involving more people up front rather than just kind of creating something for them and handing it to them, I think is a way to get quick wins, because you're making yourself aware of what the challenges might be and figuring out how to deal with them before they are issues. I think the other thing is being really focused on where you're starting and what the value is going to be for those folks, and not trying to boil the ocean and do everything all at once. And then hand-holding folks through that so that they understand what the challenges are, how to overcome them, and really just over communicating to help them understand.
That's exactly right. Really quick, Eric, I just want to add to Dale's point. On a quick win for us, it was the shared notes, the case notes. We couldn't do that between academic affairs and student affairs, and I did work on a technical enhancement to try to accomplish that in PeopleSoft with our information technology team for a very long time, and that was a quick win. Our student affairs teams, from the counseling center to dean of students to student orgs, being able to see what their academic advisor talked to them about, being able to see what their student success program, first generation student programs had talked to a student about, all in one place, made it so worth it. And reminding them what their current daily practice is around even just appointment scheduling. I had advisors who were very resistant to leaving Microsoft bookings because it was so easy, right? Now students have to log in and do all these other things to make an appointment with their advisor, and more clicks. But reminding them, hey, currently you can't tell your dean how many times you met with the same student unless you are literally going in, downloading your CSV file every 4 months, uploading it, merging it, cleaning it, and then making a report out of it. And so that ease of use and those practical use cases really, really served as quick wins and just reminders, as Dale said, that we bring up all of the time to reinforce the value for sure. And yeah, to Travis's point really quick, Eric and Jake, why we chose Salesforce was because we could accomplish everything in that one platform. And that's the central message of this webinar, is the power of the platform. We could unify all these data silos, reduce our systems, which is pretty rare when you're having to use third-party applications for a lot of work. If you can reduce that and unify both the student experience and the actual back-end work, that's the dream.
And I'll just add, Travis, that one thing we can do at Salesforce, we have a business value team. I've found that a lot of times a decision is not going to be made to make a change unless leadership in the university sees how is that going to improve our enrollment, our retention, how is it going to improve the efficiency of staff and faculty. We can do an analysis with you. We just did one that I was a part of a couple of days ago for a customer looking to move to Education Cloud. And so we were able to show them there was significant value. They had like a 30x ROI by making this move, and how much they would likely improve their enrollment percentage and retention percentage. And that really helped move the needle. So I would just say our team can do a free analysis to help you with that.